Level 3. Published by web novel. Once they were primed, I imbued my restrictions in them at the same time while chanting. Emerge from the darkness, blacker than darkness. Conceal that which is laid bare. Immediately a dark liquidy shadow substance appeared and fell from my hand and then got absorbed into the pylons while sweat poured down my forehead as I was straining to produce this curtain-type barrier. This was not unexpected since it was my first attempt at creating a barrier, and while I knew the chant and how to roughly create a barrier, experience was golden here. Any cursed energy user could make a curtain-type barrier so long as they knew how, but depending on the way the thing functioned you had to change the chant slightly. For really powerful barriers you needed to also include binding vows to the barrier and a bunch of other stuff like keys and positioning. Barriers were a sort of complicated topic and I had no intention of learning more than the bare minimum needed to use domain expansion. Still 5 minutes later I felt the barrier fully snap into place in the pylons and released my hold on it, letting the pylons suck it all up. All that remains is to finish the box once Cassandra returns, and I'll be ready to update and level up after I hear my DS options. I thought with a sigh as I relaxed and chose to let my natural energy regeneration recharge my cursed energy. It took another hour for Cassandra to return and help finish the box by using her healing spell on it while I ignited the regeneration properties of the box and stuffed it permanently into a cursed technique that was dormant until someone with an injury got in the box. Do you really need so many preparations just to level up? Daphne asked, confused when I started setting this stuff up. Last time I leveled up I barely survived and sort of created a giant commotion that people are still trying to figure out, so yes. Besides, this box at least has uses outside just this since it is a healing item. I said honestly. In case we get a repeat of the last time, are there any developmental skills I should choose? Hestia asked worriedly. Mystery, enchant, hammer or axeman, and anything related to curses or space if any of that shows up. I said seriously. Not abnormal resistance? Daphne asked confused. The DS doesn't work on curses and I'm already a hard counter to poison, so I don't need it. Might as well get a more useful skill instead. Anyways, no reason to delay this any more than necessary. Wish me luck. I said before activating the barrier with me and Hestia inside it. I know there's no stopping you from doing this, but I'll do my best. Hestia said with a determined look. You have my full faith, and if it goes sideways know that you are not to blame. I'm a stubborn asshole after all. I said with a smirk as I laid down in the box on my stomach. Hestia pricked her finger and a single drop of blood fell on my fauna, and with a swish of her finger over my back heat rapidly began to fill me as I updated. Soon the heat grew to unbearable levels as I started to feel bloated again, but I noticed it wasn't nearly as bad as the first level up. Perhaps it was because of the last level up that my vessel was more capable of holding that much power this time, so it was taking longer to collapse. The box had also activated, so that was also keeping me awake during this process. There's enchant, one-hander, loner, curse body, and abnormal resistance. Hestia anxiously said since I was still awake. Aw fuck, loner gives more excelia and stats when I hunt alone, and enchant would give me an immediate boost to my curse tool crafting but isn't strictly necessary to reach the top, it just helps. Curse body is new though, and if is what I think it might be the best option here but might make me closer to pure curses. I thought rather annoyed at all the really good options. I discarded one-hander immediately because it was just a weapon skill buff like hammer or axeman and once again entirely unnecessary to reach the top, but helped. Curse body, I said through gritted teeth. Hestia moved her finger again and the fauna began to glow blindingly bright as the level up went through, but I passed out. I wasn't out for nearly as long as last time thanks to the box healing me, but I was still out for an entire day, and even after that felt like absolute dogshit. Name, Alexander Drake. Race, cursed human. Level, 3. Strength, 0, I. Endurance, 0, I. Agility, 0, I. Dexterity, 0, I. Magic, 200, G. Spells, Hell's Forge, innate technique. Can use anything from a living being and reshape or refine it per one's will. Incantation, Hell's Forge, extensions, curse tool creation. Hellfire, subsidiary technique. Flames created originally from an extension of the Hell's Forge curse technique but expanded into a curse technique all their own that contained the tiniest spark of true hell flame. Incantation, Hellfire. Skills, Heavenly Restriction. In exchange for the ability to wield mana and magic, one gains access to cursed energy and cursed techniques. Blessing of Black, permanently increases cursed energy efficiency, amount and control. Magic will always start at G rank after leveling up. Vessel of Sin, Hell's Forge Master carries the burden of all mortal sin and is tasked to purify it from the souls of the dead. Strengthens soul over time, permanent increase to crafting with cursed energy, permanent decrease to all stats for each innocent soul killed and increase for each sinful soul killed. Grant skill, Soul Gaze. Soul Gaze, see the souls of all things and their sins. Developmental skills, Curse Smith, H, Curse Body, I. Other than my stats there was 2 major changes I got from this level up. The first was that my Hellfire had actually become its own curse technique and as a result got a hell of an upgrade, pun very intended. Hestia also sort of very much freaked the fuck out about it since true Hellflame was a divine fire and should be impossible to exist here, yet I had the tiniest spark of the stuff. When it said that, by the way, it meant it as the spark was like a pinprick of light in the otherwise black flames but very much present. The second was my developmental skill that was a gamble taking but so worth it once I figured out what it actually did near instantly. To put it simply, the DS made my cursed energy more efficient. It did this by improving the natural affinity for the stuff my body had, so in that regard I was sort of right about the downside as well. The DS made me more like a cursed spirit that was naturally very efficient with their cursed energy since they were literally made of the stuff. https://www.patreon.com/user?u equals 815788854 #:text equals patreon.com/patreon_loscro. Visitors. Published by web novel. Danmachi-Hell's Forge. Alexander Drake died and got reincarnated by R.O.B. in the world of Danmachi with a gift in the form of Hell's Forge in exchange for his memories of that world. He will go on to become an adventurer in the dungeon city of Orario from there. It took me 3 whole days after leveling up to return to some sense of normal and not feel like my body was holding a grudge against me. That wasn't to say my body was done with its refinement from the level up in that time, merely that I no longer felt like shit. It came as little surprise, but my tattoos had grown a bit, though admittedly not by much. I now had 3 long triangles on my back at each side just under my shoulder blades, which I assumed represented wings of a sort. If I ever actually turn into a cursed spirit, I think I'll actually look like a demon at the rate this is going. I thought with a chuckle. Level 3 already, lad? Really making the rest of us look bad with how fast you and that other lad are shooting through the levels. Haroldar said with a laugh. He, like most of the city, had gotten the news of my level up almost the same day it was reported to the guild and had come for a visit as a result. Not much sense in slowing down when we can rise quickly now, is there? I asked with a shrug. Aye, that's true. Still, you two got some people starting to wonder if you'll come to threaten those hegemons sitting at the top at the rate you're growing. He said seriously. Not likely. While I can't speak much for Loki and her familia, we are fairly friendly with both Freya and Hephaestus at the moment, so neither are likely to turn hostile to our rise. I said honestly. Now that you mention it, how come you aren't charmed by Freya like everyone else? Hell, she's even got a bloody level 7 charmed and yet you seem unaffected. He asked curiously. I shook my head with a chuckle. Otter isn't charmed by her, just devoted to such a degree that it might appear that way. As for myself, I am just the exception to the rule, so that infamous charm of hers rolls right off me rather than digging in. Ironically, that is actually one of the things that pleases her the most and why she is so friendly with me. She's lonely. I said honestly. Bollocks. She can get nearly any man or woman in the entire world into her bed if she wanted to. Haroldar said in disagreement. Indeed she could, but that was the whole damn issue. She can't have friends like normal folk because her charm affects damn near everyone. For all the company she could have, she is so alone that besides Otter she has no real companions. I present an opportunity for her to change that, so naturally she was eager to take it. That was how we got where we are now. I said calmly. Hadn't thought of it like that, but upon imagining it, it doesn't seem so far-fetched at all. How do you know all this anyways, lad? He asked and I smirked. She told me herself, of course. I said casually. Her old R wasn't the only visitor I got after my level up got passed around as Tiona, Ptah, Hermes and Hephaestus also came to give congratulations as well as look to uncover juicy information for themselves. Hermes. For Tiona she wanted to test how much stronger I was now but left disappointed that I wasn't in any shape for sparring. Ptah was under the impression that after my level up my crafting abilities had no doubt soared to new heights and wanted to commission a whole plethora of things from me at my new and improved level of ability. I had to quite bluntly explain that that wasn't how the fuck that worked at all. While in theory leveling up should make me a better craftsman, the reality of the matter was that all it did was increase the room I had to grow as a craftsman instead. I had already reached the pinnacle that I could achieve in the short term for my level 2 abilities before I leveled up, but now I had a new pinnacle to stride towards after leveling up. Cursed tool crafting was simply just like that, where there was in fact a limit to what you could achieve depending on your actual level of power. More power meant a higher limit, simple as that. Obviously you could exceed these limits with the right circumstances, but the idea still stood just fine. Even in terms of my non-cursed tool creations such as the figurines, all my leveling up had done was increase my available cursed energy pool while allowing me to use less energy to do more. That last part was entirely because the energy had gotten an upgrade in quality when I leveled up, and thus a smaller amount was worth more than before. Cursed body was also needing to be taken into account here, as it boosted my efficiency by a not small amount. In any case, I had bluntly told Ptah that he needed to chill the fuck out with his rampant commissioning, as I still needed time for myself and didn't want to spend all of my time working like his commissions would have had me. I did accept a couple of smaller projects from him though, just to keep him happy. Hermes was less welcome when he visited, however, as I still maybe was holding a small grudge from the previous incident. I have to admit, you certainly have a pair on you to actually show up here looking for information, I said with a raised eyebrow at the smug blonde god sitting across from me. It wounds me that you'd think so little of me. Do I seem like such a treacherous individual? He asked, feigning sadness. I nodded vigorously. Yep. You give me the impression that you'd be more than happy watching terrible shit go down if it meant you achieved your goals, I said seriously. His face twitched a bit at that and I chuckled. Seems like I struck a nerve. Dead on, am I right? I asked and he sighed. That skill of yours is rather annoying. No hiding one's intentions at all when your very soul is laid bare to see. Since this is the case, I'll be straightforward. You are dangerous and I'm here to make sure you don't become a problem, he said firmly with a sharp look in his eyes. I smiled. See, was that so hard? It's a wonder how much we'd get done if everyone was so clear from the get-go. Not that you were being entirely honest here, that is. You already know becoming evil isn't possible due to my skill. No, you were here to try and fish for information on my full strength. No doubt to try and make plans to tame me so I don't get in your way, I said with an amused look as his expression darkened. https://www.patreon.com/user?mark u=8157885 #*tilde:*text=patreon.com/patreon_loscro. Fiery Changes. Published by web novel. Danmachi-Hell's Forge. Alexander Drake died and got reincarnated by R.O. B in the world of Danmachi with a gift in the form of Hell's Forge in exchange for his memories of that world. He will go on to become an adventurer in the dungeon city of Orario from there. Hermes of course ended up leaving in a bad mood after I flat out ripped off the mask he was wearing to cover his true nature and thoughts. I didn't care, however, as the god was little better than a snake that was waiting to sink its poison fangs into you. Perhaps his intentions were good in general, but he was far too willing to cross lines he shouldn't achieve his end goals. The less such a person knew about my abilities, the better in my opinion. The best part though was that I knew for a fact Freya was breathing down the messenger god's neck to keep him in check and from making plays involving my familia in the shadows. How did I know this? Because I had asked her to do so once it became clear Hermes wasn't going to leave it well enough alone. Despite technically being a mere delivery familia on the surface, the Hermes familia was easily one of the most influential familias in Orario in the wider world, as well with more than a little blackmail on many powerful people. I wasn't stupid enough to antagonize such an entity without having the backing needed to keep it from crushing me like a bug. Freya was more than happy to take that position, which even if it wasn't explicitly stated also made my familia something to keep a healthy relationship with for even the Hermes familia out of caution. Anyways, Hephaestus's visit was pleasant enough, even if a little awkward as she tried and failed miserably at flirting. I mean, like E for effort, but clearly romance was not her strong suit. I admit I also probably frustrated her to no end, as despite having an army of people wanting to hook up with her, she had to choose one person who wasn't really interested. Like, I get why she was trying to hook up with me since it was sort of public knowledge, but basically she had decided that she would only hook up with a craftsman that managed to impress her. My curse technique definitely qualified, and that was pretty much the whole reason she was trying to snag me for herself. It was a weird fucking way to decide a partner in my opinion, but who am I to judge? It also wasn't like I was totally averse to the idea either, as she was so my type. She was hot, easy to understand for me, and smart, the whole package. My reluctance, however, came in the form of her not wanting to play by catch and release rules, but rather for keeps. If she was going to get me, she wanted to make sure I knew that that was it. I was spoken for afterwards. I wasn't really interested in that level of commitment at this point, unfortunately. I might be okay with it later when my leveling slowed to a crawl due to the amount of power I had, making it difficult to find a challenge, but for now I wasn't going to give in to her attempts at attraction. Anyways, once my body finished its refinement, I started messing around with my flames that were now a whole ass curse technique. After the upgrade from extension to full technique, the flames had changed in a few interesting ways. The first was of course the spark of true hell flame that winked out of existence almost the instant it appeared, but was devastating to whatever it touched in that time span. I'm talking now you see it, now you don't type devastating. The second change was that the flames became more real, I suppose was a good description. Before there was no force behind my flames, just heat and death. Now however, sending out a burst of flames actually caused some pressure to be pushed back onto me like a normal flame would. If I concentrated my flames to burn brighter but in a smaller area like a rocket thruster, I could even create enough reverse force to push myself back. This gave me the idea that if I used them right, it might be possible for me to fly in a similar fashion to Iron Man. Naturally I attempted exactly that, and well, it didn't go so great. I could certainly get off the ground, but the issue is that humans aren't built in a fashion to fly like this. My arms and feet that were the sources I used to try and fly from twitched and moved, which in turn messed with the angles and direction of the thrust put on me. I spun out of control and dragged my face across the grass or into a wall more times than I like to count. Turns out that whole scene from the first Iron Man movie where Tony blasted himself into the ceiling and walls was not just for shits and giggles. I was durable as shit thanks to my stats, but that didn't mean face planting at like 20 miles an hour didn't hurt like a fucking bitch. Everyone else in the familia laughed their asses off at my failures over that whole 3-day period before I got the hang of it and actually hovered for the first time. They certainly weren't laughing then, but were jealous as shit instead. Anyways, once I had proof of concept for flame-propelled flight, I set that aside to continue messing with my flames to figure out what else had changed about them. I did eventually discover that the alive factor of the flames had further developed, as I could now create fire clones. These weren't real clones, but rather merely my flames formed into a humanoid shape that could move and fight like me somewhat. They were still just flames though, and thus didn't actually have much substance to them, but if you didn't know that, they were very good distractions. Your magics are so unfair, Daphne complained after seeing my new clones. All magic is unfair, some are just more so than others, I said sagely. Said the man that spent 3 days eating dirt just to hover a foot off the ground. She said with rolled eyes. Not my best moment, I admit, but to be fair I can't be blamed. I mean, come on, don't tell me that you wouldn't try to fly if you thought you could, I said, and she reluctantly nodded. https://www.patreon.com/user?mark u=8157885 #*tilde:*text=patreon_loscro. Styles and Potential. Published by web novel. Now that you've leveled up, I assume you'll be going deeper into the dungeon now, right? She asked, changing the subject. Nope, I said with a snicker at the incredulous expression she had at that answer. But why not? She asked, confused. I like to squeeze every drop of potential and benefit I can from each part of the dungeon I explore before I move on. I simply haven't done so yet for the Great Tree Labyrinth, I said honestly. But aren't those monsters now sorta weak for your current strength? She asked, missing the point. Besides the green dragon and variants that sometimes show up down there, that's true. However, the drops and materials from those floors are especially useful for me. I even discovered a whole new species of monster down there the last time I went, so who's to say that I might not discover even more wondrous things there before I'm done with the place? I said with a widened grin. You used that weird magic of yours to find those monsters, right? She asked curiously. Cursed technique, but yes, that was how I discovered the species. It wasn't even all that incredible a find, to be honest, as even normal grubs are well known to live inside trees, so finding out that monster grubs were also found there in the dungeon trees was kinda a matter of course. I said with a shrug. Whatever you say. Anyways, when are you going to make Cassandra and I some new stuff? She asked bluntly. Have some patience. I haven't forgotten or anything, but for Cassandra alone I'll still need more time, as I am not quite able to use that refined unicorn horn yet. As for you, there's not a whole hell of a lot I can do for you besides giving your current weapon an upgrade, since you rarely use your full power. I can't even really make any supportive items for you either, as you suck at staying in one fighting style. Seriously, like it's either you were on the front lines or are playing distraction with hit and run tactics. I said, annoyed. She got quiet at that, as I wasn't wrong at all. She had been rather indecisive about how she wanted to fight, and it made things annoying for me to try and make any useful items for her. For the rest of the Familia's members, it was easy as shit to find a way to improve on their fighting styles because they are consistent in how they did things. Not to say that Daphne wasn't skilled in fighting, because no one gets to level 2 without some degree of skill, but she was all over the place in how she fought. Sometimes she was right up there with Belle, Welf and Lily at the front directly fighting the monsters, but then other times she was practically acting as a rogue that skirted the fight to take attacks of opportunity before slipping back to a safe distance. Even worse was that she had whole ass magic that she simply refused to use unless it was absolutely necessary. The really annoying part for me was that it was a boosting type magic to boot, which meant she was never at full power without using it, which made my job as a craftsman so much harder than necessary. I'm not saying that being able to go from one style to another wasn't good, because it certainly was. But when it starts to get in the way of you improving, it's probably time to decide which was your primary style and which was your backup. I left her to think about that and went into my workshop to tinker with my new limits in the crafting department. Naturally, the potency of my Hell's Forge technique had gone up considerably after my level up, so the upper limit of material levels went up to level 5 and maybe even 6 once I got better at working on stronger, more potent stuff. This wasn't to say my skill went up, merely that my technique was more potent, better fuel for it now after all. First I tested my technique on level 1 materials like goblin teeth and war shadow claws. I was amazed to find that it practically cost next to nothing to mold the things even after refinement. A fascinating thing I discovered was that after I pushed a material's refinement to the limit, it transformed qualitatively. I affectionately refer to this transformation as material ascension. Goblin teeth that were ascended, for example, reached level 2 in quality while also gaining a sort of special property having to do with the weapon wielding DSs that boosted them further than normal. So a normal monster material pushed to ascension gains special properties like a variant monster's drops, but more specific to that species as a whole rather than the single individual. Is this why variant drops have special properties? Do they themselves ascend to a higher existence and thus their drops do too? I pondered this phenomenon curiously. I experimented further and came to the nasty conclusion that at the moment I could only ascend level 1 materials. This wasn't because the materials were too strong either, but rather it was like my technique itself was resisting the attempt. In other words, a bottleneck had reared its ugly head yet again. Admittedly, I had been wondering when I'd find another one after I broke the previous one when I fought that Minotaur so long ago. From what I understand, they weren't exactly uncommon in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, as each user of a cursed technique pushed the limits of their techniques, and that meant finding areas that they stalled in until they got some form of enlightenment. The two most common bottlenecks were domain expansion and reverse curse technique. Both were notorious for the difficulty they presented to accomplish, with even someone considered a prodigy of that world like Satoru Gojo only figuring out reverse curse technique after coming close enough to death to feel its chilling breath on his face. Smaller bottlenecks like this one that I had just discovered, however, should be far more common and easier to get through so long as you kept banging your head against it till something broke. I wasn't going to be doing that just yet though, as I had so much more room in other directions that I could improve before I really needed to expand my technique to go further. Honestly speaking, my curse technique was one of those bittersweet type deals in that for all its vast power it actually had too much potential. It wasn't nearly as straightforward as my newly minted Hellfire curse technique that was basically just a quirky fire. My Hell's Forge simply had too many different potential ways that I could expand and improve it because of the sheer vastness of the concept it embodied. https://www.patreon.com/user U equals 815788854 #:text equals patreon.com/patreon_loscro. Hiatus. Published by Web Novel. Danmachi-Hell's Forge. Alexander Drake died and got reincarnated by R.O.B. in the world of Danmachi with a gift in the form of Hell's Forge in exchange for his memories of that world. He will go on to become an adventurer in the dungeon city of Orario from there. I know what you're thinking, but no, I'm not dropping this or my other story either. I'm not sure how exactly it happened, but you guys are somehow closing the gap between Patreon and here, which is not great news for me. This hiatus is so that I can widen that gap back up to a respectable 25 or so chapters ahead on my Patreon, so like a couple weeks max. I know some, if not most of you, don't want to pay to read the full library of what I have written, but for those of you that don't mind and have joined my Patreon, it's only fair that you get your money's worth. With that in mind comes this hiatus from this story and my Naruto FIC. For a bit of good news to damper the bad, I will be posting daily 2 chapters of my Pokemon FIC, since unlike this one, that FIC is almost 60 chapters ahead on my Patreon and can do with a bit of slimming. On a related note, I can explain some of the benefits you get from joining my Patreon, though most don't use them. Direct contact. Yes, if you send me a message on Patreon, I will read it and respond as appropriate, spoilers and all. Reading ahead. Obviously all my active stories are ahead of what I post here on there. Creative edition. You guys get the unique opportunity to decide what I write via polls on the Patreon at the end of any particular story. In addition, you can make suggestions on my current stories that if they fit can and will be added to them. This can be anything from an item to a whole character. Lots of room for imagination. All that said, here's my link. https://www.patreon.com/user U equals 815788854 #:text equals patreon.com/patreon_loscro.